because Nexus means like the thing, the point to which everything else is connected. The Nexus point is like the middle connection point. Like if you have a mind map,
Yep.
you have your Nexus, and then everything else kind of stems from that. And that's
You're not going to find a better name for your first scope.
everything else from here was kind of an adaptation. When we did the Titan, it's like, okay, we like the throw lever, we like the tool-free
Knurling,
caps, we like all of this, and we kind of took these things and just adapted or improved it for everything else. Time to don the headsets again.
Here we go. Back in SA.
Back in SA. Well, we've been here since
we never
the last-
left.
It's about a minute since we recorded the previous podcast, so we still fresh.
Yeah.
Sun is about to go. Well, it's already gone down.
It's
It
right
went down while we were talking. This is your last sunset in South Africa before you head home.
No, I'm not looking forward to it. I was hoping I could stay longer,
Yeah.
but I guess there's always next time.
Yeah. But hey, once we're done with recording this podcast, we're gonna go make a stew, or poiki as we call it, and sit around a fire and enjoy some time
It's gonna
together.
be
So
good.
it'll be
It's gonna
good.
be real good. I'm hungry.
Yeah.
You've been talking the stew up, so
Oh, I promise you, it's gonna be one of the best.
I'm sure it
if
will.
not the best
Everything
you've
you've
ever had.
made this whole week has been absolutely amazing. So
Yeah.
I have no doubts.
Yeah. Welcome to the Element Optics podcast. I'm Matt Dubber, and this is Shane Keller.
Shane Keller.
We're out here in South Africa, sort of just doing product development, hanging out together, testing stuff, talking about future plans, all of that.
Doing it all.
And when thinking about ideas to talk about for the podcast, I had to bring out a book,
This is actually really cool.
which is, it just says new scope project ideas, suggestions and thoughts. And this was the start, the origin of what became the Nexus. So in this podcast,
And Element Optics.
and Element Optics, because the Nexus was the start of Element,
Yeah.
pretty much. Nexus came before Element, sort of. So what we'll do is in this podcast we'll talk about the Nexus story,
What?
and I'm keen to have you ask me some questions because
Yeah, a
Uh,
lot of this started, because I came on board
Yeah.
after the fact, and you pretty much had the Nexus almost done by the time I started. So
yeah, and then from there we kind of used the Nexus as a launch pad
Yep.
to make
And-
the Helix and
exactly
Titan, which
right.
was basically your and my project.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's hear your side, and got a few questions I can definitely ask you that
Yeah.
I'm curious about.
Cool. So, if you want to know the Element story, we've just done that in a episode 1 podcast. But essentially, when we started Element Optics, it wasn't starting Element Optics. It was, let's make a scope, and let's do something in the optics industry. And we didn't quite know what, and we didn't know whether it would just be one SKU, or one scope, or whether we'd end up making more. So, when doing our first scope, we put a lot of effort into making sure, like, if you're gonna buy if the customer's gonna buy one scope,
Mm-hmm.
what would it be? So it was never gonna be like a far out like F class 5 to 50 or like an LPVO. It was gonna be something that was more of a general all-purpose scope.
Yep.
Because we wanted it to be used for the stuff that we were gonna use it for. We being back then myself and Ted, and so. The very first thing we did was we put together just a sort of design criteria page and went through magnification range, first focal plane versus second focal plane, tube diameter, objective lens diameter, all this stuff. And we kind of went through what was important to us, and I sent this through to Frederick, who was sort of going to fund the whole Element thing, and he said, looks good. And we ended up moving forward, deciding to do this, to have the scope made in Japan, because, firstly, as a new optics company, we wanted to make sure that we worked with manufacturing partners who had lots of experience
Mm-hmm.
and weren't relying heavily on our input for like mechanical tolerances and stuff, which we, as being new, wouldn't have known. We wanted to make sure we gave the correct design criteria and like what tracking tolerances were acceptable to us, and all that stuff. And then they made the magic happen.
You were kind of going in there and blind. You knew what you
Oh, yeah,
wanted, but you didn't know
we knew
the
nothing about
process.
making a scope.
Yeah.
At that point, we just knew what scope we wanted to make.
Yep. Exactly.
So we had to.
There's a lot of
It
in
was
between
a lot of- it was very
from there to
interest- It was
there.
very interesting, but so we settled on 5 to 20 times, which is the Nexus Gen 1. I'll actually pull it out here. Nexus Gen 1,
This
5
is,
to 20 by 50.
This is one of the original
I mean,
4.
If you were only going to ever have one scope, this is not a bad option. 5 to 20, 5 times you can do a lot with. 20 times you can do a lot with. We settled on 5 to 20 instead of something more because we weren't sure doing a first focal plane. Reticle thickness, how would it be too thick at 5? Would it be too thin at, too thin at 5, too thick at 20? Would we be pushing the optical system too hard if we went any higher? But we wanted it to be versatile. And I had some experience with 5 to 20 times optical systems and really thought, that kind of covers a lot of it. So we started there. 50mm objective, not too big, lets in plenty of light. This gets like 90 MOA of travel or something, which is plenty. So you can kind of do anything with this.
Yeah, not too heavy.
Illuminated. I mean, what else could you want? Zero stop, and we specified all these things that we needed. And I think it was Ted who decided on the name Nexus, because Nexus means like the point to which everything else is connected. The Nexus point is like the middle connection point. Like if you have a mind map, you have your Nexus, and then everything else kind of stems from that. And that's
not going to find a better name.
Literally what this was. Not only does it sound cool, but it's the scope from which everything else from here was kind of an adaptation. When we did the Titan, it's like, okay, we like the throw lever, we like the tool-free caps, we like all of this. And, we kind of took these things and just adapted or improved it for everything else. So that was very cool. I do want to tell the story of the knurling.
Yeah, because that's very cool.
It's very cool.
I enjoyed,
and it's also very ghetto.
I remember on the train, we were on a train, overseas, and you brought that. It was a lot nicer back then, but you had all the pictures laid out, and I was just amazed at what you had done.
Yeah. So basically, what you're seeing here, I don't know how well you see it. I'll have to put a cutaway here, but what you're seeing here is a sketch that I did in my backyard, sitting on a garden table and chair outside with the birds around me and everything, and just thinking about hey, if I had to turn a magnification ring, what sort of texture would I want? What looks good? What size should it be? And it ended up taking the cap of one of those glue sticks, the glue you glue paper down.
Yep.
Just the cap off. Feeling it, oh, that's a pretty good size. Put it down on paper, drew a circle around it, and then I took a bunch of smaller pen caps and drew little cutaways around that in a sort of even pattern. And then I think what I did was I passed this on to my dad, who's a structural engineer, and my dad ended up doing proper CAD drawings for the parallax knob, the magnification ring, the turret cap, and you can see that's literally what the Nexus cap ended up looking like. So it's very weird looking back at this, but that's how everything started.
That's pretty neat.
It just shows that was all done by feel on hey, what do we think would work well?
Well, it's someone like yourself who shoots day in and day out. You've dealt with a lot of different optics, a lot of different guns, and you really get a better understanding of what works well and what you like and what you don't like. And, knowing those small changes, if you could ever do it yourself, what you would add this or remove this.
Exactly. And then when it came to, it was very daunting to do reticle designs and stuff. Not because I didn't know what reticle I would have liked, but reticle's a very subjective thing.
Oh, yeah. I don't envy you for doing reticles. Matt makes all the reticles on our scopes, and he gets a lot of feedback from a lot of people because it's very opinionated.
Very. You can't make a reticle for everyone.
No,
it's impossible. You have to make something that's kind of that most people will accept. And if you're going to do a niche reticle for a niche group, that's fine. But then you're going to understand a lot of people won't like it.
Yep.
But what we did was we ended up looking at surveys on, I think it was the Precision Rifle blog, and we looked at all the most popular reticles for precision rifle style disciplines and long range disciplines, and seeing what all of those had in common. And that was the start of the APR reticles, because we kind of wanted to see, okay, well, if this is the most common for the top shooters in the sort of disciplines that we're trying to build our scopes around, then they must be doing something right. So let's, those particular subtensions like 0.2 mil markings or 0.5 or a floating dot versus floating cross, all that stuff, and try and, make sure we do something that's going to keep most people happy. And then we had to figure out line thickness, which was difficult and was stressful waiting for those first prototypes, because it's not cheap to put in tooling.
No, it's not cheap at all.
For a reticle.
And they'll send you the drawing, but that only shows you what it looks like.
Nah.
You have no idea until you physically pick that scope up and look through it.
Yeah. So it was a relief when Shane and I went to the factory for the very first time to go inspect the first prototypes.
Yeah. There was 4, and that's, I
they
think,
were-
number 30.
This is serial number 00003, and
That's
you
it.
are lucky because you got number
I
1.
yeah. I'm not getting rid of it.
No,
so.
that's a special. That's a
We-
very,
We're
very
not getting
special
rid of
scope.
it. One day we'll put it up. It'll be right next to that booklet, and it'll be in the office, and
Definitely.
it'll be great.
Yeah. Anyway, when we looked through these for the first time, and we saw the line thickness, which was pretty close to what we envisioned, we were relieved. Like, thank goodness, like that turned out perfect. We were I remember us being so stoked with how everything felt and looked. I mean, obviously there's things that we've improved on since now. Like, we've got a Gen 2 Nexus out now, with better turrets and all that stuff. But back then, going from nothing to this was awesome.
Yeah, because until that time, it was just all on CAD files.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And we were in fact so stoked with how this turned out that on the train journey back to the airport, back to Tokyo, I think it was like a 2-hour train journey, and you and I sat across from each other.
We did.
And we did the entire Element Nexus instruction manual from start to finish in 2 hours.
Is that the one that you printed out?
This is the one I printed this out shortly after I got home, and then this is the final one after we properly printed it. But this is printed on my home printer, like the pages stuck back to back. And this was, I mean, I got home, these pictures in the manual, that's on my own rifle. I put like a white piece of paper behind it, and with my other hand I took the photos as like a
It
green
turned out
screen.
great.
It
You
was
would've never
so,
known.
the only word is ghetto. It was so ghetto the way that we like.
Yeah, well,
But-
you make ghetto look good because it turned out amazing.
Yeah, the thing is, like, we were driven by so much passion. Like, how many people can do this in 2 hours? But we did, because we were so like excited to see this thing through the finish line, and to see like the public's response to it, that we just made it happen. And I think that was like, I think for me, the development of the Nexus will always stand out as something special, because
Of course.
it was like from nothing to something.
And it started it all, just like the name
yeah.
Nexus, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because like you said, even Element, I mean, Nexus, from my understanding, what you've told me before I got on board, was that was going to be the scope, and you didn't really have plans for doing other scopes.
Exactly.
Or even a name, whether it was going to be the FX Nexus or whatever Nexus, and it was the start of Element, and
It was.
where we're at today.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, we're on to the...
it has a special place in all of our hearts, for
It
sure.
does. Like, we've gotten onto the Gen 2, but there's something about the original one that will always kind of be kind of special.
Of course.
Like, the Gen 2 is definitely better. There's no doubt about it. Like,
Yeah.
we've improved on
Improved the turrets.
almost everything, but this was never a poor scope in anyone's mind. It was...
No one ever. We sold a lot of Nexus, and we never had anyone complain saying, this doesn't work or this could be better.
Yeah.
We chose to do the Gen 2 because we'd, with the turret system that we have on the Theos and the feedback we got on that, it's like, hey, we can implement that into the Nexus.
Yeah.
We need to do that and keep improving on. But
Yeah.
overall, the Nexus was a great scope and continues to be a great scope.
Yeah. The Nexus development was like almost done by the time you came on board, but there were definitely some key things that you had input on. Like for example, when we first went to inspect the first prototypes and we went to look through all the quality control procedures and how the tracking tests are done and how the return to zero tests, impact tests, all that stuff
Mhm.
was done. It allowed us to get an inside look into like production techniques and potential blind spots of the people who make scopes, because
Mhm.
let's remember that especially when it comes to making stuff in a place like Japan where they don't necessarily shoot as much as we do, it's really important that the control over manufacturing like tolerances in this in the sense of like instructing them on what's really important to follow up on and what's not, and like what the scopes have to handle in the real world. That's
It's
on
very
us.
important.
And
Yeah.
we were able to make the decision to put a QC tag in every box with every scope, which we've done to this day with basically everything,
All of our scopes.
all of our scopes, and we've had full control over the inspection procedures during
Yeah,
manufacturing.
we had a whole list typed up.
Yeah.
And what needed to be checked off to meet our requirements.
Yeah. So we essentially decided on what was acceptable to us in terms of tracking tolerances, how straight the reticle had to be, in terms of alignment with the turrets, parallax, precision, all of that stuff, and put it in a long quality control inspection sheet. And every scope that we make, no matter where in the world it's made, has to pass all those inspection procedures.
Yeah.
And
And,
then
and we get a test sheet that's sent to us for every shipment too. That all those things are checked off, and
Yeah.
it's all done by the serial number of the scope, so we can
Yeah.
we can see everything. The tracking, they test every scope tracking, and we know exactly what the percentage was and be able to go back and reference anything that way. If it's not, it's like, well, hey, you guys said it was, and we spot check it at the factory, or not the factory, but at our warehouse in Sweden, in the U.S. as well, when they arrive. So
yeah, and something to mention is we've had very few, like you look at the percentage of everything we've sold, very few warranty claims.
very few.
And we were talking today about out of every warranty claim we've had, probably only when we actually go and physically test the scopes on a collimator or whatever we're doing, probably only about 10% of them are actually faulty, right?
It is. It is.
Yeah.
And a lot of those faulty ones are, accidental stuff where, somebody dropped their scope and
Yeah.
cracked the lens, or had a guy fell off the top of his truck because he was shooting from his bed and actually forgot that he was on there and took off driving. And
Yeah.
it fell off, and, the whole turret got bent in. So, of that 10%, a lot of it's just accidental stuff. It's not even
Yeah.
failure of the scope. It's
Yeah.
just, dropping it and abusing it where nobody should abuse the scope that way.
My brain is no longer working.
The sun's going down. We're getting
Sun's
hungry. My brain's fried.
Well, we don't want to ramble on forever about one product, so that was our quick story about the Nexus, the one that started it all. Some of the little like behind the scenes things that happened that I'll never forget that train ride where we got so much done in 2
In
hours.
that 2 hours, we got a lot.
That was kind of one of those special moments that we'll look back at that one day and say that was something that made us who we are.
Mm-hmm. It definitely gave us the momentum that we had,
Yeah.
or needed, and continue to have.
Yeah. And as we wrap this one up, all I can say is long live the Nexus.
Yeah.
We're on to the Gen 2. I'm sure one day in the future there'll be a Gen 3. I'm sure we'll do, continued improvement on all of our products, but the Nexus will always
There'll
be
never be another Nexus.
never be another Nexus. It'll always be the first and the one that got everything started, and that file and these first scopes, your
Yeah.
serial number 1.
Yeah, we got 1, 2, 3, and 4. 2
That's
MOA and 2
gotta be
MRADs.
something that's kept forever.
For sure.
For sure. So
For sure.
thanks for watching, guys, or listening. We're going to go have a stew now.
I'm hungry.
Starting to get dark.
Sun's going down.
Wind is picking up. let's go eat, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.
Until next time.